The afternoon sun was still high when the front door slammed behind a man carrying nothing but a worn backpack, a faded family photograph, and the tiny hand of his 6-year-old son. In a single heartbreaking moment, everything he had spent years building seemed to disappear. The people he had trusted most had decided he no longer belonged in the only place he had ever called home. Neighbors quietly watched from their windows as the father stood frozen on the sidewalk, refusing to let his tears fall because the little boy looking up at him still believed his father could fix anything. What no one standing on that quiet suburban street knew was that less than 24 hours later, the same man would unlock the front gates of a breathtaking $30 million mansion, leaving everyone questioning how someone they had called worthless had been living with a secret that would change every one of their lives. His name was Adrian Mercer, a gentle, hard-working father who had spent the last 7 years raising his son, Rowan, after losing his wife to a sudden illness. The tragedy had left deep scars that never completely healed, yet Adrian refused to let grief define his son's childhood. Every morning began with homemade pancakes, school lunches decorated with encouraging notes, and long walks beneath bright blue skies where father and son invented stories about clouds shaped like castles and dragons. Adrian worked remotely as a consultant while quietly managing investments he had built years before anyone around him understood the value of patience, discipline, and long-term vision. He never flaunted success because he believed peace was worth more than admiration. To his relatives, however, his quiet lifestyle looked like failure. Since he dressed simply, drove an old pickup truck, and rarely spoke about money, they assumed he barely survived each month. After his parents passed away, Adrian moved into his older brother's house to help care for their aging grandmother during her final years. He contributed to every household expense, paid medical bills without announcing it, fixed broken appliances himself, and spent countless weekends repairing the home while everyone else relaxed. Even after their grandmother peacefully passed away, Adrian remained because his brother insisted they should keep the family together. At first, the arrangement felt comforting, but over time, resentment slowly replaced gratitude. Adrian's sister-in-law viewed him as an unnecessary burden despite never realizing that many of the family's financial problems quietly disappeared because Adrian handled them behind the scenes. Months passed, and whispers gradually turned into accusations. Every missing grocery item, every unpaid utility bill caused by someone else's mistake, and every inconvenience somehow became Adrian's responsibility. Family dinners became uncomfortable as conversations stopped whenever he entered the room. Rowan noticed the tension but tried to smile anyway, believing kindness could solve everything. Children often understand far more than adults imagine, and Rowan could feel that his father carried invisible pain every day. The breaking point came during a bright Saturday afternoon. Adrian returned home after attending Rowan's school art exhibition, proudly carrying a colorful painting his son had made. Before he could hang it on the wall, several suitcases had already been packed and placed beside the front door. His brother avoided eye contact while the rest of the family insisted that Adrian had stayed long enough and needed to leave immediately. Their words cut deeper than any financial hardship ever could because they questioned his dignity rather than his circumstances. Rowan clung tightly to his father's arm, unable to understand why family could suddenly become strangers. Adrian never argued. He believed that anger often creates wounds that remain long after words fade away. Instead, he quietly picked up the bags, thanked them for the years they had shared, and walked away beneath the warm afternoon sunlight. Every step hurt, yet he refused to let Rowan see despair. He smiled, bought 2 ice creams from a roadside cart, and told his son that sometimes life closes one door only because something greater is waiting beyond another. That evening they stayed at a modest roadside motel. The room was small, but sunlight streamed through the window until dusk painted the sky with gentle shades of orange. Rowan asked whether they would ever have a real home again. Adrian simply hugged him and promised tomorrow would be a better day. The little boy fell asleep believing every word because his father had never broken a promise before. Before sunrise the next morning, Adrian received a phone call that would surprise anyone except himself. His legal advisor confirmed that months of confidential paperwork had finally been completed. The restoration of a family trust established by Adrian's late grandfather had officially transferred ownership of multiple properties, businesses, and investment assets directly into Adrian's name. Years earlier, Adrian had refused early access to the inheritance because he wanted to prove to himself that character mattered more than wealth. The trust required patience, maturity, and years of responsible financial stewardship before everything could legally be released. That day had finally arrived. As daylight spread across the city, Adrian drove Rowan toward a quiet hillside where elegant iron gates slowly opened before them. Beyond the entrance stood an extraordinary mansion surrounded by ancient trees, peaceful gardens, sparkling fountains, and endless green lawns glowing beneath the morning sun. Rowan's eyes widened with innocent amazement as butterflies floated across colorful flowers lining the stone pathway. For the first time in many months, Adrian felt something he had nearly forgotten: hope. The mansion was beautiful, but what mattered most to Adrian was not luxury. It represented security, healing, and the opportunity to build a future where Rowan would never fear losing his home again. Instead of filling the enormous rooms with expensive decorations, Adrian created spaces filled with books, music, family photographs, and laughter. Every bedroom welcomed sunlight through wide windows, reminding them that brighter days always follow even the darkest seasons. News traveled astonishingly fast. Curious neighbors from Adrian's old street soon discovered photographs of the magnificent estate appearing in local newspapers after a charity event hosted there. Rumors spread that Adrian had become wealthy overnight. Few understood that genuine success had taken decades of sacrifice, wise decisions, and silent perseverance. Many who had judged him based on appearances suddenly regretted their assumptions. His brother eventually gathered enough courage to visit the mansion one bright afternoon. As he walked through the front gates, embarrassment weighed heavily on every step. He expected bitterness, revenge, or cold rejection. Instead, Adrian welcomed him with the same quiet kindness he had always shown. They sat beneath the shade of an old oak tree while Rowan happily played nearby, chasing colorful butterflies across the lawn. Adrian explained that wealth had never been his identity. During the years everyone believed he struggled financially, he had intentionally chosen a simple life because humility allowed him to recognize people who valued character instead of possessions. Sadly, many had mistaken simplicity for weakness. He admitted the family's rejection had broken his heart, but he refused to allow pain to transform him into someone filled with resentment. Those words deeply affected his brother, who realized that greed and pride had slowly poisoned relationships that once meant everything. Genuine apologies followed, not because Adrian owned a mansion, but because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. Trust could not be rebuilt overnight, yet forgiveness planted the first seed of healing. Rather than spending millions on luxury, Adrian established scholarships for children who had lost parents, renovated neglected community playgrounds, funded local libraries, and opened a family resource center where struggling single mothers and fathers could receive childcare, career guidance, and temporary housing. He knew exactly how loneliness felt, and he wanted others to discover hope before reaching their breaking point. Rowan flourished in this new environment. The frightened little boy who once worried about sleeping without a home gradually became a confident, compassionate child who greeted every visitor with warmth. He learned from his father that the greatest measure of success was not the size of a house but the number of lives made brighter because someone chose kindness instead of bitterness. Years later, many people remembered the magnificent mansion, yet those who truly knew Adrian remembered something far more valuable. They remembered the father who smiled while carrying heartbreak, who chose forgiveness over revenge, and who proved that dignity cannot be taken away by rejection. They remembered a man who transformed unimaginable pain into endless opportunities for others to rebuild their own lives. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that kindness is always stronger than cruelty, thank you for spending this time here. Stories like these continue to inspire hope because people who care keep them alive. Special request: tell us in the comments about a moment when someone showed you unexpected kindness or gave you a second chance. Your story may encourage someone who needs hope today. As the afternoon sun settled gently across the mansion's peaceful gardens, Adrian and Rowan stood together watching children laugh on the playground their foundation had built. The home that once seemed like an impossible dream had become far more than a symbol of wealth. It had become a place where broken hearts found healing, lonely families discovered belonging, and hope quietly replaced despair. Adrian finally understood that the greatest victory was never moving into a $30 million mansion. The greatest victory was refusing to let rejection harden his heart, choosing instead to build a life so full of compassion that even those who had once cast him aside could find forgiveness waiting at his door.